In Genesis chapter 3, beginning at verse 16, we read God's description of the tragic consequences of our first parents' disobedience. In verse 16 we read, "To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." The last part of this verse is routinely misinterpreted, and it is often mistranslated in our various English versions. So let's take a look at BibleHub.com/interlinear. Click on Hebrew Interlinear Chapters. We're already in the book of Genesis. We select chapter 3 and scroll down to verse 16. And here I beg your indulgence as I dig into the Hebrew a bit deeper than the interlinear translation provides. The first word is wa'al, and remember that the beginning consonant waw with the short schwa vowel forms the introductory syllable wa, which can be translated as either and or but, depending on the context. And which of those two meanings the translator chooses in this context reveals how the translator understands the rest of the verse. The second part of this word, wa'al, is L with a short E vowel. It does not mean God, but rather it is a preposition that means to, toward, into, in regard to, and in this context the English word for is a perfectly proper translation. And for Ishek, your husband, teshuka, your desire. The English requires here what the Hebrew grammar takes for granted, namely a future tense be verb, properly translated. For your husband shall be your desire. Wehu means and he or but he. Yemshal shall rule. Bach over you. How we understand this last half of verse 16 hinges on our understanding of the meaning of this word, teshuka, which can be translated as your desire. But this is not a romantic desire that a wife has for her husband, which we normally assume at first glance at this verse. We need to take a deeper look at this word, so we click on Strong's Concordance number. The dictionary form of the word is teshuka, and it's a noun. And what immediately strikes me is that this word that we translate as desire appears only 3 times in the Old Testament. So this is not any of the usual Hebrew words that we find elsewhere that have the meaning of the English word desire. This word is unique. It's different somehow. The fact that there are only 3 places in the Bible where we find this word, that severely limits a lexicographer's ability to explore any varied nuances of the word. The 3 contexts where we find teshuka are Genesis chapter 3, the story of the fall. Then immediately in the next chapter of Genesis, the story of Cain and Abel. And then in the Song of Solomon, a romantic love poem. Because 2 of these 3 settings use the word teshuka in the context of marriage, lexicographers have drawn the conclusion that teshuka can mean loving affection, or as the Strong's lexicon suggests, a longing. But as I examine how teshuka is used in the book of Genesis and in the Song of Solomon, I concur with a growing cadre of Old Testament scholars who seriously question that assumption that teshuka refers to loving affection. The key that unlocks the actual meaning of teshuka in all 3 of its biblical contexts is here in Genesis chapter 4, the Cain and Abel story. And here in verse 7 we read where God warns Cain, "Sin lies at the door, and for you, wa'elaka teshukato, is its desire. But you, Tim Shalbo, should rule over it. Sin lies at the door, and for you is its desire, but you should rule over it." Here we see a graphic word picture, sin portrayed as a carnivorous beast, lying in wait, lurking, ready to pounce on its unsuspecting prey. And here we have this same word, teshuka, which obviously here does not express loving affection, but rather a craving to control, or worse, to kill, dismember, and consume for dinner. And there's something else that is strangely familiar about the way this sentence is structured. It's exactly the same sentence we find in Genesis chapter 3, descriptive of Eve's desire for her husband and his mastery over her. Only the names and the pronouns have been changed. To Cain, God says, "Sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." And to Eve, God said, "And your desire shall be for your husband, but he shall rule over you." So Eve's newfound desire that God describes in Genesis 3:16 is not loving, affectionate longing for Adam, but it is a contest, a struggle for power, for control. And as her husband responds in kind, it's a contest which God says she will lose. This certainly is an accurate description of the effect of sin in the marriage relationship. There are many passages of Scripture that define and describe a husband's role as a loving leader. Genesis 3:16 is not one of them. Rather, this verse identifies the problem, diagnoses the illness, for which Ephesians chapter 5 prescribes the cure. So how should we translate Genesis 3:16? Clearly, several English versions which convey the meaning that desire here reflects an affectionate longing have it wrong. Even my favorite New American Standard Bible missed the point. The translators of the most recent edition of the English Standard Version got it right as they attempt to convey the meaning of teshuka text by rendering this verse, "Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you," with a footnote referring the reader to Genesis 4, verse 7. I would favor a footnote that describes how the word that is translated here as desire means desire to control. Well, this solves the mystery of what teshuka means in Genesis. But what about Song of Solomon, where the wife says, "I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me"? At first glance, it appears that teshuka here means loving affection, just as it did when we superficially read Genesis 3. But as I dig deeper into the text of the Song of Solomon, it becomes clear to me that teshuka here still refers to the desire of a predator for its prey. But the wife uses the word teshuka in a playful way. She is, in a sense, saying, "My husband is the predator, the hunter, and I am his prey, and I'm very much enjoying the hunt." The wife in the Song of Solomon takes joy in that her husband is pursuing her. In the description below this video, I have links to further studies into Genesis 3, things that our Sunday school teachers never taught us about Adam and Eve, and also a more thorough examination of the meaning and application of teshuka in the Song of Solomon. Finally, the third chapter of Genesis ends with a reference to the tree of life. I've already done a New Testament word study on that topic, which you'll find near the top of the playlist for this series. And thank you for watching.